Well, here we are at the AI Summit in New York. I'm happy to say I've got IBM joining me here with Seth. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Chuck.
So you're doing AI for all of IBM. How on earth do you get your hands around that?
Yeah, so my role at IBM is managing the AI strategy for the whole company. So defining what that strategy is, activating the whole company towards the execution of that strategy. That includes both our internal efforts as well as our external efforts. It is a big beast to move.
So how do you even start at that?
You know, I think there's multiple places to start with this. So one is really just getting the right people in the room and really refining and defining what IBM's AI strategy is, because IBM's overall strategy is hybrid cloud and AI. The hybrid cloud strategy is very clear. It's based on Red Hat OpenShift. The AI strategy has evolved over time, so it's been a little bit less clear. So the first part of the job was really, this is what we mean when we say AI, and this is what Watson means.
So who at IBM cares? Is it everybody who understands the scope and basically the critical nature of this?
So because it's half of our overall company strategy, everyone at the company cares about it. Everyone at the company should care about it because it means that the future success of our company.
So again, how do you get your arms around this? I mean, IBM alone is just so big.
Yeah, I think, when you look at how you do this, like I said, it's really crystal clear definition of the strategy. IBM's AI strategy is understanding the language of your business in your language with trust, enabling automation of and through AI, delivering trustworthy AI in and of as an entity in and of itself, but in those other things, and then deploying those capabilities anywhere. That is what AI is. It's telling that story over and over again. It's building educational capabilities, right? Because I can't have everyone in the room when we're doing this. So it's getting the right people in the room, building the collateral. It's essentially an internal marketing campaign and an internal educational campaign that we do this.
So is it primarily education that people need in businesses?
So people need to be armed with the knowledge. I know you talked to Manish Goyal earlier about trustworthy AI. A large part of what he does with customers is education, getting them up to speeds. A lot of what our partners, Deloitte, Accenture, Ernst & Young do is education of customers, right? It's really getting customers to understand, what does AI mean? Over the course of the pandemic, we've seen 10 years of digitization, which means implementation of data and AI in 1 year. People are just now catching up and understanding what happened, what it means, how they can further expand the use of this type of technology.
So we're here in an AI, the AI Summit, obviously, and everyone is just moving gung-ho to AI. Are they going too fast?
I think it's really important when you implement AI to understand, to do it from a human perspective. So I've been, over the course of the last 18, 24 months, even pre-pandemic, I've been advocating for taking a more human approach to AI. What do I mean by that? When we implement AI, it's going to get used. So up front, thinking about who's going to be impacted by that AI, so who's the ultimate end user, whether they know it or not. Why is that AI being built in the first place? So what problem are you trying to solve? And how is it going to be implemented? If you don't think of that human perspective up front, your AI is less likely to be adopted, and it is more likely to be untrustworthy and untrusted by the customers and by the ultimate end users. And especially when someone's health, wealth, or livelihood is at stake, you need to make sure that you think about the human before you start building the AI.
So Watson goes way back, Jeopardy days. Was that early AI?
So, there's, the New York Times had an article that, a few months ago, whatever happened to Watson. I wrote a really long response to that on LinkedIn and talked about from its inception with, from the release of it with Watson 12 years ago, that was literally the cutting edge of implementing AI. And Watson then is very different than Watson today. That was a research project. Since then, we've had other research projects like Project Debater that are really showing the art of the possible with what can happen and what you can do with AI. When you look at what this manifests itself at, think about customer care. Going back to COVID, right, and the pandemic, we worked with companies like CVS Health and Kroger to help them figure out how do they get out to the public and get them the information they need about COVID, get them access to vaccines, based on a multitude of requirements from different municipalities, different cities, different counties, right? We all had different, you qualify for a vaccine at different parts, depending on what county you lived in some state, right? So how does CVS manage this? Leveraging Watson, right? Leveraging a AI capability that understands the language of business, understands the language of, or the context of that business, the jargon of that business, really helped us build capabilities for CVS to get that information out to us as a society and as consumers of this critical, component of getting our lives back in order.
Yeah. So is that basically at some point it was fast calculation? At some point it turned to something more than that.
A lot of these language models are all, the base of them are built, right? And so it's training the models on the specific industry, on the specific use case, on the specific desired outcome to solve that human need, right? Another great example of this is, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. And this is a great example because, we have veterans who are submitting claims for their health care. These are people that have, for the U.S. have put their lives on the line to keep us safe, right? And we weren't doing a good job of serving them because there was months-long backlog before people even responded. And so leveraging Watson, leveraging, our AI capabilities, helping to the Department of Veterans Affairs to digitize all that information, get rid of that backlog, and now they can respond in minutes or hours instead of weeks or months when a veteran has a new claim. That's a really powerful, impactful implementation of AI that impacts real humans, people that are waiting to get health care, waiting to get paid back for health care, that have put their lives on the line to get, to keep us safe in the past. This is really impactful.
So it sounds like you're saying it's not really about the technology, it's about the solution, essentially.
It's about the outcome. And I think, Watson is, in order for AI to be successful, it can't be technology focused. It's got to be human focused, which means what is the problem you're trying to solve? What's the outcome? So
what are the roadblocks that companies face when, not IBM, but companies, because I know you deal with a lot of businesses, when they say we've got this huge problem with implementing AI, what do they come up against?
Yeah, so a few years ago, I was on this kick of how do you keep AI from being a scam, right? Which is how do you people invest the skills to build AI are very, very expensive, and we were as companies were investing heavily in these skills, but they didn't have a strategy. They didn't know what problems they were trying to solve. They were letting these people who are scientists, right? They're data scientists, experiment and do things that were cool and they thought were impactful, but oftentimes they didn't come from the business. They didn't understand the business, and so they were solving either non-existent problems or problems that the business didn't think were problems, and so you had to fight to get them implemented. Again, this goes back to the businesses don't start with the humans. The businesses don't think about who is going to be using it, why that AI is going to be used, and how it's going to be implemented.
So do you come across cases where a company says, we need some AI to do this, and you go in or your team goes in and they say, you actually don't need AI, you just need something else?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you think about deep learning, right? Everyone wants to use deep learning and neural networks.
Gotta have it.
I gotta have it, right? Well, why? What problem are you trying to solve that uses deep learning? There's been a number of times where I've gone in to have conversations, and you could solve this with rules. You don't need AI. You have a series of rules that you can do this, or it's a simple linear or logistic regression that's going to solve this problem. It's not a neural network. It's kind of the same conversation when people used to say, I need real-time data. Well, are you talking about credit cards or national security? Well, you probably don't need real-time data. You probably need fresh data, but you don't need it sub-millisecond, right?
So you're primarily helping people come up with the right questions?
I spend a lot of my time helping people come up with the right questions. So helping them understand how they're going to build their strategy. And then our team goes in and helps them define that strategy and then execute that strategy, again, in a trusted manner. So we're bringing in this whole AI ethics concept. We're bringing in how do you govern your AI, especially with the upcoming EU AI regulations. So how do you make sure that your AI, when it's in a protected area, is trustworthy, can meet the proposed guidelines that the EU is putting forth?
And And you're extremely global as a company. Are you seeing differences by region?
So yes, I always encourage customers to manage to the highest bar that they operate in. So we go back to GDPR, right? It would, as a company, IBM, and we encouraged everyone, if you have a footprint that impacts Europe, assume you need to comply with GDPR globally. We're going to take the same approach with the AI regulation, where wherever you operate, whatever the most stringent rule is, that's what you should adhere to, unless you have a really, really good reason not to, because these things are complex enough. You don't need to have added complexity of you can do A here, but you can't do A here. You can't do B here, but you can. It just creates too much complexities. Just have a level playing field and do everything the same everywhere. And it's really, that, and it's, usually these things are put in place for a reason, and it better public perception of AI if you manage to that bar.
So what's the most common question you get outside?
I think the most common question I get is, what's the future of AI?
So what's your answer?
The future of AI is
you
human.
have to know it.
The future of AI is human. It's really doubling down on this human-centric approach. I also, tied to that, I also get questions about, what are the upcoming technological advances of AI? The answer to that, in my opinion, is neurosymbolic learning, which is, think about it as AI reasoning. So today, AI can't reason. It can answer some good questions, but it's really probabilistic. It's not constrained learning, so it's not contextual. Neurosymbolic reasoning applies context, just like the human brain does. If I ask you a question, if I say, what customers are there, right? You're going to answer customers based on your context. You're not going to go out there and say, look the whole world. This neurosymbolic algorithmically applies context. The other area is quantum. So what's the impact of quantum on AI? Today, we know for sure quantum can solve simulation problems that are otherwise intractable. Monte Carlo simulations, those type. We expect that to continue and expand as we get more and more quantum capabilities. Beyond simulation, it's probably going to be a hybrid quantum traditional compute problem-solving space, where quantum will help reduce or increase the capacity to do some AI problems that you couldn't do with traditional compute alone, but it won't be only quantum.
So organizationally, is quantum going to fall under AI, or is it going to be separate?
It's going to be separate. It'll be both. So there'll be some applications of quantum that are AI, and there'll be some that aren't. I think quantum is still very, very nascent. So it's really hard to say. But
I'm only asking. We're looking at quantum. We're trying to see where does it fit in the grand scheme of AI.
I think it's just like any other tool, right? It needs to be driven by the use case, right? It needs to be driven by what problem are you trying to solve, and applying, not having a hammer and looking for a nail everywhere. It's, here's the problem, we can solve it. Let's all, Occam's razor, what's the simplest way to solve it? You don't want to jump right to neural nets or quantum. You want to solve it with logistical or linear regression if you can. But there are some cases where you absolutely need quantum, or will need quantum, because but I don't know what those are today. We're still figuring out how quantum will really impact AI.
Right. So a year from now, we're sitting here having a conversation. What will we be talking about?
I think we'll continue to be talking about trust. I think we'll continue to talk about AI regulation. And I think we'll start to talk about really how do we contextualize AI, and how do we use smaller data sets to deliver AI.
Well, I look forward to that conversation. Thank you so
Likewise,
much.
Thank you.